Hi, welcome to the Village Green. We're bringing you a new talk show that will be featuring only the good news that's happening in and around the Upper Valley. I'm Jen McMillan, your host, and this is my colleague and co-host, Elizabeth Crabe. And basically our mission over the next few months is to focus on and bring you the positive stories of the good people, good places, and good things happening in and around the Upper Valley and our communities. Essentially, good news happens all around us, and we're here to celebrate the stories that make the Upper Valley such a fabulous place to live, work, and play. Storytelling is a major component of what we're going to be doing over the next few months, and sort of our first episode will feature the concept of storytelling. And basically, storytelling has been, is a buzzword actually in the marketing world, in the business world today, and it really has been around since the dawn of humans. And storytelling has been such an important element that has shaped the human species and our world today. We share stories of our cultures, of our values. People would tell people about other places they've been to, riches they found, resources. And so really storytelling has allowed humans to evolve to where we are today. Before we really get into the notion and the topic of storytelling, I would like to just tell you about the Village Green publishing story and how it came to be, and how this talk show has come to be. In 1995, when I had my first daughter, the idea of putting her in daycare and going back to my 9-to-5 job was absolutely something I could not do. I physically, emotionally, every part of my being said there's no way I can put her in childcare and just do my 9-to-5. So as serendipity would have it, the Quechee Times came to be. It was up for sale, and I just heard through the grapevine. And so I met with the former publisher, who was 83 at the time, and we developed this rapport that was really, really mutually beneficial. I mean, she wanted to sell it to someone who knew the area and really understood, the history of Quechee Lakes and Quechee, and I grew up in Quechee. And she was able to finance it for me, which allowed me to basically have a whole new career change that allowed me to have my daughter with me. And that was really the start of Village Green Publishing. At that time, I didn't intend to have good news only stories, but it was also at that time that mainstream media became extremely negative, extremely sensationalist, and it was getting to the point where I was overwhelmed. Watching the daily news and listening to the radio and reading newspapers and whatever, everything was negative, everything was sensationalist, and it just got to the point where I was actually depressed and angry a lot, because it was just so, our world just seemed like it was going down the tubes. And I was thinking, what on earth could I do to possibly make a difference? And it was sort of overwhelming. So I decided, at some point, I realized that I could do something. And that was when I made the conscious choice to publish good news only stories in the papers. And so really from that point on, Village Green Publishing became a good news only media company. I had the Quechee Times, and then I started the Norwich Times in 1997, and the Northeast Journal in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2004, and the Lebanon Times in 2013. And each of these papers produces good news only community uplifting stories at the local level. So that's really sort of how Village Green Publishing came to be. You know, when Elizabeth and I were talking about doing a talk show, it was with the idea of complementing what we already do in the positive, uplifting stories, but being able to bring it to a digital stage, so to speak, and really offer up these stories on a more regular basis than just our quarterly publications. So Elizabeth had to dive into this, and because she's just started with Village Green Publishing in May, I think.
Yeah.
And so, Elizabeth, why don't you just tell us your story and how you sort of came to this table as we speak.
Okay, my story I don't think is quite as long and as interesting as yours, but I came to you from the Woodstock Area Job Bank, which is a nonprofit in Woodstock that helps connect people in the community to find jobs and get jobs filled. So the thing that excited me about Village Green was that you're sharing personal stories about everyday people, and I think that's what it's really all about. One of my successes in building community in Woodstock was just telling simple stories about people so everybody could get to know one another. And I think it makes people turn back to their community for help when they need it. And so I think that it's what excites me about the papers that you publish, and makes me excited about this program too.
Yeah, we've got some a bunch of different themes that we'll be featuring over the next few months, and they're all very much about what connects people at the human level. Whether it's our beloved pets, or mentoring. Some of the other themes. I don't know. Maybe you can remember some.
No, but we talked about mentoring and coaching, talking about intergenerational relationships, people's relationships with their pets, which seems silly, but it's a big part of our lives. Education on a community level.
Right.
We're leaving the big issues for the news networks.
Exactly.
But it's exciting because the first guests that we have on our show were Scott and Lindsay from the World Story Exchange. And what they do is all about storytelling. That is their purpose. They travel around the world and locally and work with school kids and help them through filmmaking to tell their own personal stories. So I'm excited to share that with everyone.
Yeah, we spent probably about an hour a couple weeks ago in the studio here, discussing what they do, where they go, and the importance of storytelling. And we actually, our goal is to provide, in their own words, clips, or to show clips of that interview. And that's actually the format that we'll be using throughout the subsequent episodes. We'll be taping or recording people's stories about whatever the topic is that's relevant, and then Elizabeth and I will be talking about the topic, and then we will air their stories on video so that you can see more interesting people talking about real live examples from around the Upper Valley. Hi Lindsay, hi Scott. Welcome to the Village Green. We're so happy to have you, and we just know that your work is so important, and we'd really like to hear about World Story Exchange and how you got started and the projects you're working on. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So World Story Exchange, Lindsay and I started World Story Exchange about 6 years ago now, based on the idea that youth are the key to the future, and that we feel that a lot of the ills of society can be healed in future generations. We also think that misunderstandings between people are one of the root causes of conflict, and that stories are actually can heal those rifts. That a misunderstanding is when two stories do not connect. And so by sharing stories and having people understand one another, we think that we can foster more peaceful societies locally and then globally as well.
How do you go about doing the work that you do?
We partner with schools and community-based organizations to facilitate 1 to 2 3-week-long programs that invite students to learn the basics of photography, the ethics of media making, how to tell either your story or the story of who you are documenting. And through the week, 2-week, 3-week-long program, by the end, they've edited a short 2 to 5 minute film.
So they're doing it themselves.
They're doing it themselves.
That's cool.
We carry 12 small, shockproof, waterproof, kid-proof cameras in a backpack, and usually day 2 or day 3, the student starts to bring home the camera and explore their world, documenting photos and videos.
That's great. You must have kids taking things to unusual locations and kind of getting crazy with it.
Yeah, one of our favorite assignments is to just simply say, take us to the places that you love to go. What is it about your local environment that you value, and show us that place.
Most of the students that we work with outside the United States have never used a camera before. We seek rural places or communities where it would be more challenging to have resources at your fingertips, or is more challenging to have resources at your fingertips. And both in the United States and in other countries, the students feel enormous responsibility and take care of the camera. Well, we work with a school in California where the students at some point have experienced homelessness, and we decided, let's send the cameras home, and they were so grateful that they were able to care for this object and then use it to share it, to tell their story, and they felt very empowered by that. And I think a connecting factor is the cameras now have been used by over 1,200 students around the world. So when they get the camera, whether in elementary school, middle school, or high school, they've heard and seen stories made by other youth around the world, and it's that same camera, the same notebook, same bag, and so it carries all those stories of trying something new, being afraid, exploring a story they haven't shared before, whatever
That's
journey they
interesting.
end up on.
It's interesting to think of it that way.
Yeah. So where in the world have you gone? I mean, it sounds, World Story Exchange, and it sounds like you're really meeting some kids from, vastly different cultures, and that would be a great opportunity to share and spread, to each different group, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we work in about 6 schools in Vermont. We have another 5 schools in California that we work with. We've worked in North Carolina. We've worked in Nicaragua, Mexico. Beirut, Lebanon is one of our upcoming projects.
Wow.
We've also worked in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So how on earth do you find the locations, and how do you make those connections to even get your work in their, whether it be their school system or their community?
We look at the world very often on Google Earth. It's a way that you can see communities and how they are shaped. And so at times when we're going to a new country, we look for villages where they're congregated together around one central place. And we really like going to communities that have fishing boats right up on the beach. That means they're actively fishing and they're going about their everyday life. We do try to steer away from more touristy areas, but we also have ended up teaching in touristy areas because we've ended up there. So it's a product of having countries that we want to explore, finding schools and communities that we feel like their voice really needs to be heard, that their stories must be told because we aren't hearing them on a daily basis. And then the universe also catapults us where we're supposed to be. And so it's a combination of a lot of different ways. But we're always open to collaborate, and we believe that every student, youth, has a voice and a story to share. That's very important to the collective.
So where are some of your dream places to go that maybe you haven't been invited yet or haven't approached yet?
Currently, we're looking at, well, the Middle East
Okay.
is going to be our next place, Beirut, Lebanon, working with an organization called Home for Hope,
Okay.
which
Home of Hope.
Home of Hope, which serves refugee youth and kids who have been living on the street.
Okay.
We're also looking at West Africa as a future possibility.
Yeah. I've always had a dream to teach in Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. Ever since I was little, a student came from Saudi Arabia, and I got to sit next to her in school, and then I worked with many physicians from the Middle East, and I think there's so much misunderstanding between our country and the Middle East that people are people wherever we show up. We're welcomed in wherever we arrive. There are some people that welcome you, and then there are some people that are having a tough day, but there's always that dynamic range of people in every community.
Sure, you get that at the grocery store in West Lab, right?
So the Middle East, Africa is definitely, we're hoping, Scott grew up in Africa and in the Upper Valley, but I've always wanted to go there, and I haven't yet. I tend to love all places, but being on top of a mountain, I'd love to do a project with a group of students who live on top of a mountain and have lived and been there their whole life.
Right.
That would be a dream for me.
So do you, excuse me, share your stories, from group to group, and how does that work? And what are the reactions, between, when the kids see, sort of a similar story happening across the world, what's the reaction? And
Yeah, so every school that we work with, we begin by sharing the stories from previous projects. So we just finished doing a screening for the whole school in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so those students got to see stories, recent stories from refugee youth who are from Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq that we worked with in Greece. They got to see stories from students in Indonesia who are practicing their religion and going to the mosque 5 times a day. We've shared stories from rural parts of Cambodia. So we begin every project with that sharing of stories and presenting it as an exchange. So the project then invites students to tell their own story and to contribute their story to our growing library that we then share with the next group of students.
As our archive has grown, since we've been doing this for so many years, that we still can share those stories. And so we've been thinking about creative ways of how to do that more. And so having school-wide screening is one way. So where a school wants every student in their middle school or high school to see films, and they'll bring them in auditorium style. Or at Lebanon Middle School, we're developing an advisory film series where every morning they meet with their advisory, and once a week for 5 weeks, they're going to see one youth-made film and then have a dialogue facilitated by their advisory teacher. And so that's going to happen in every advisory for every student in the school at the same time. And then the 8th grade, 50 of the 8th grade students will embark on a project of sharing their own story on one of the core values of the school. So we're excited about that model, and they're helping us create it as well so that it fits their needs as a school.
Do kids that you work with, do you give them a prompt when you give them the camera to go out into the field and film, or do you have them just share a story that they care about?
Our prompts will typically start with the basic human needs. So food, family, shelter, like
Okay.
where do you live, what do you value. Oftentimes, pets are kind of a
Oh, yeah.
common denominator.
Brothers, sisters.
Yeah. So some students are ready to run with the story, and we don't need to give them any prompts.
Okay.
We worked with a student who is from Afghanistan, and he had a story about his journey from Afghanistan to a refugee camp in Greece that he knew he wanted to tell.
Wow. Right.
Other students are not quite sure what they want to tell, and then we encourage them to talk about those basic human things that everybody shares.
That's a good way to, it sounds like you can really draw people out who might not think their story's interesting enough. You know, I mean, I think telling your story after the kid from Afghanistan suddenly wouldn't seem quite that important, but it is important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And it's very normal to see your own life as, it's just my life, what's the big deal?
Right.
But then you start to realize that everybody is doing the same things, they're just doing it differently.
Right.
And that if we can see those differences, we can start to appreciate our cultural differences. And we think that that can lead to sharing and understanding and ultimately a more tolerant outlook for students moving forward into adulthood.
Right.
Do you think that there's an age group where this is an optimal, tool for that end? Or does it sort of seem to go across all
We
levels?
tailor how we teach our curriculum based on the age group. So, and I think elementary through high school, learning to use a camera as a tool is an effective practice for every student, since especially in the United States, they're carrying it on their hip with them. And so how to use the camera as a tool is rather than just for social interaction. I find with high school students, with enough time for the project, they can really witness themselves in a different way and connect with being a citizen and what their voice is as a citizen in their community, and then share that. And through the process, surprise themselves and really step almost into more of an adult by the end of the project. Where a middle school student is more so learning how to complete a project. Like each step, to make a film, you have to do each step or you won't actually complete the film. And by doing each one of those steps, they learn something about themselves as a learner and what component was the obstacle, and then how did you overcome it. And then elementary, they find things in our environment that is so amazing. I mean, bugs and creatures and symbolism and magic that you wouldn't think could exist in the landscape that we're around. One group of middle school students were really surrounded by cement. I mean, they lived in the inner city in outside of Oakland. And they said, there's no bugs here, there's no fruit, there's no color. I mean, what are we gonna take pictures of? And by the end of a week, we printed a photo for each student, and it was just incredible what they found on their yard. Someone found a little rose bush that they had never known was on their school grounds. They found oranges, they found bugs of all different colors, and so they're much more curious, and what they find due to that leaning in curiosity is incredible. So I think a camera can be a tool for anyone to explore their world, remap their world in a magical way or in an empowering way. Taking the time to become a documenter, like a 45-minute photo walk, is what it takes, the willingness to just go and do that.
So you did allude to one story of the Afghan boy talking about his journey. What are a couple other examples, like specific examples that have really made your work real and fulfilling the mission that you have?
Another story that comes to mind is from Nicaragua. And this touches on the citizenship aspect that Lindsay was mentioned before. And that simply means a shift in the student's mindset from, I'm just a kid who doesn't really play a role in my society, but then they get a documentary story assignment. And in this case, the assignment was find something in your community that you're concerned about and make a film that addresses that. So this student in Nicaragua was concerned about protecting the local sea turtles. That the culture has a history of using the eggs and eating the eggs and digging up the eggs. She went around town and interviewed, she and he, there was a team of students, interviewed locals and started to uncover who and why people are taking the eggs. In the process, a 10-minute documentary was made that ended up being screened all over town in a big community screening, and started to get the whole town to look at this issue, this environmental issue, and start to make changes within their own minds, and start to see from the youth perspective that this is something we should stop.
Wow.
That's fantastic. Makes you think we should just turn cameras over to all the kids and get a lot of problems solved in a short period of time.
Well, that's one of the things about working with youth is they haven't yet been jaded, and they don't see those barriers that a lot of adults see, those practical barriers. Oh, we could never do that because of this, 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 and this.
Right?
For a student, for a young person, it's like, let's do this.
They don't have the filters that adults have too.
Exactly. So for those reasons, they make very good documentary filmmakers.
And I think also we don't turn to them for solutions as much as we should. Having worked with them consistently for the last 5 years, they're so wise. And yes, they are kids, but when they find themselves in a focused human-to-human moment, they have such wisdom. I reflect on a student. We always have a screening at the end of a project. I think it's really important to honor each student for their work and what they accomplished. And adults make mistakes too. And one of the films, we didn't have the final edited version, and somehow the film we played was scrambled and wasn't the story that they had made. And she came up and said, "Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It's okay." And it was just this moment of like, thank you. We needed to just hear that, and it came from you. And so I do believe that in our planet we have all the pieces to restore peace. And I think a huge part of it is turning to the younger generation for wisdom and advice. Every project, environmental, protecting the environment, caring for the environment, comes up. You know, we work with a lot of kids who have seen their villages go from clean, sustainable, no physical man-made trash to now being covered in trash. And they understand what happened and are frustrated about it and want to change it. And they find the words to say it simply and effectively. And so, with time.
Do you think, as you turn to the youth in these cultures, are they able to navigate some of the, maybe traditions that are in place that maybe prevent them, from, without the camera, they wouldn't necessarily go to the elders, let's just say, of the community, because then that's not what you're supposed to do. But perhaps the tools that you're bringing to the community allow for sort of some of the maybe cultural norms to be shaken up a bit.
Yeah, we'd like to hope. We think that we see that within our workshops. We definitely do, of students being empowered, students going out and shaking up those cultural norms. We'd like to think that after we leave that some of that empowerment stays. That's one of the the things about our work is that we're very broad. We have a lot of breadth. We'll often return to a community once a year, but there's a lot that can happen within that year, and so we hope that empowerment can grow without us being there. But that's one of the questions, I'd say.
So tell us about what you're doing locally. You've gone to a lot of wonderful exotic places. What's happening around Vermont and New Hampshire?
We've been partnering with CLASP, which is Creative Lives After School program, through the White River School. And that's been a wonderful opportunity. We also helped run their summer camp. And we're doing more nature-based explorations. We found that with the camera, every camera or most cameras went to nature, and kids were documenting nature. And so it led them to nature. And so this summer we started in nature and really teaching about the ecosystems of nature. And we live as much in the woods as we possibly can. And so sharing that with youth has been something we've been working on. We've been working on igniting our senses, like exploring nature with our senses. And then after listening, hearing, being in nature, then we'll introduce the camera. And we find that they're that much more in tune or attune with what's there and what they've already found is that they want to document.
Yeah. We've been doing that with the Upper Valley Haven also. Been working with Hartford High School for the past few years, as well the Hartford Area Career and Technology Center. Woodstock Union High School was an early partner of ours.
We worked with Marion Cross and with the art teacher there.
Right.
Did Open Fields School in Thetford. We've had an ongoing partnership with them.
Yeah. So we always come back through here.
Yeah, well,
the Upper Valley
home, isn't it? Right.
is our home, and Dorothy Byrne has allowed our program to be sustainable in the Upper Valley. So she's matched 10 projects over the last year. So every partner, we try to, if they can pay some, and then we try to find matching sponsors for those projects.
Okay.
So we're grateful for her.
What challenges do you have? It all sounds wonderful, but I'm sure there's
Yeah.
challenges that come with it too.
Well, I think one of the challenges is that we're a small organization. We're a married couple, and that's not a challenge. But running a small company that we have about 20 different partnerships that we have to maintain throughout the year, and each partnership has different amounts of administration that are required for it. So the back end work, the teaching is wonderful. We both just love working with kids, and the media making is also, I love that side of it. But the back end work, all the nuts and bolts that go into running a small business and maintaining those professional relationships, marketing ourselves, I think is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
Talking about our work. So all the things that a larger organization would have, teams of people doing,
Yeah.
it's just us. So that's
All right.
Yep.
So one of the things you just mentioned, one of your local partners is the Haven. And, one of the things that I want to talk about in an upcoming episode is just the notion of giving and receiving, because this is, the holiday season. And, just wondering your philosophies on that as, as it pertains to your work and maybe your work with the Haven, but in your work in general, just in different cultural ways that we all as humans give and receive.
Yeah, I think of the art of giving and the art of receiving. And they're different, but they're also interconnected. And so, you can give financially, you can give with your energy, you can give with your love, your time. and then also receiving. Like, in order to actually give, we have to be able to receive ourselves. And so that's something in our work where often we don't always get paid for our work, because education is just not, there isn't a lot of money to distribute within it. And so we give our time to do the project and know that what we receive will be enough for us to sustain, which it is. Communities have us put our tent somewhere or park our van somewhere, or they feed us. One of the most amazing experiences I had about giving and receiving was when I was working in a village in Vietnam 12 years ago, and we were building a school for the community. And they had told the widespread community that people that weren't going to even be using the school that we were there. And they walked for 2 days with bundles of bananas and coconuts, and someone had brought a pig, and I mean, they walked for days and they would just walk up and hand this to you, and we had enough food, but the gift and their gratitude, receiving that food and receiving their gratitude, I learned how to do that in that moment. And those bananas tasted so good. You know, they were charged with, I believe, with love and gratitude. And so I think to give, you also will receive, and then when you receive, you will then be giving, and so it's this cycle.
Yeah, I think another angle on the giving and receiving is in our own work with inviting students to tell their own story. That's an act of giving. They have to look within themselves and decide what they would like to give of themselves and show from their own lives. So that's hard for a lot of people, to kind of boil down your own life into what you'd like to show. So that's a type of giving. And then on the other end, receiving those stories, the students that we work with that see those stories, or that try to learn from those stories, I think that's also a type of art of, we all have biases about what we think is a Muslim, or what we think is a student from Eleuthero, Bahamas. And to really receive a story and to learn from it, I think we have to turn off those biases and try to be as non-judgmental as possible. And that, I think, gets more difficult the older we get and the more experiences we have. We build up these ideas about who people are based on where they come from and what they look like. And so the ability to kind of turn off what we've learned and to receive those stories in and of themselves, in their purity, I think is an art on the receiving end.
Have you been surprised along the way of perhaps some countries or cultures that are more open to receiving stories than others, and perhaps more open to putting themselves out there, or are we all kind of the same in that way?
I think some cultures are telling more stories, like intentionally they're sharing more stories within their families and their communities, and
Sort of the fabric of their life is
it's just
stories.
how they communicate is in story, and yeah.
I think I see that in American students who are saturated with media and saturated with images and videos. There can be a really kind of blurry gray area about what a story is and why a story is important. So some of our process with US students is unlearning what's important and unlearning what they should be filming, to try to get down to the most basic human stories about food and family, shelter, school, athletics. Like, these are kind of these basic human stories that do come out at the ends of our workshops. But I'd say kids who don't grow up with so much media saturation images have an easier time accessing those basic human stories and telling those stories.
That's great.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So tell us, how can people see your work?
WorldStoryExchange.org. Under the projects tab, there's every project. Every project has a website,
Okay.
and on there lives the films that students have given and their families have given permission for
Okay.
the films to be online. And you're welcome to watch them anytime and share them.
I'm planning on watching a lot of them.
Great.
Yeah, they're all different. All of our stories are different and unique. So
Each film is typically between 2 and 5 minutes
Okay.
for the personal documentaries, and then community documentaries are like 8 to 12 minutes long.
How do you handle the language barrier?
So we started working with translators. Every
Okay.
translator we've ever worked with has been a first-time translator, too. So we do a lot of, if you understand what I'm saying, raise your hand. And our first time ever using a translator, the translator translated, but no one raised their hand. So something,
Oh.
there was a disconnect between us or the students and the translator. And we learned that Vietnamese know how to read English much more in the beginning of them learning to speak English than hearing it spoken. And so we started writing everything on the board, and they got it. And so we work with a translator now, even if there is a medium language barrier, like Scott is fluent in Spanish, but we still will find a Spanish-speaking translator.
We also find that teaching a visual medium makes it a lot easier to show examples of what we're talking about. So we teach Photo 101 is kind of one of the first lessons that we give students about, and there we can show all sorts of examples about different types of photographs and different types of angles. So that makes it easier to have to communicate across languages without words quite so much.
Yeah, we spend as much time as possible out in the field, and so we can show a student how to hold a camera, use their body to keep it steady, rather than telling them in the classroom. And then we use Translators Without Borders. They actively translate our films.
So there'll be subtitles?
Spoken word.
They're an organization that
Okay.
takes foreign language films or other media and translates it and adds subtitles. So they're a service that we use.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing your stories with us.
You're welcome.
We look forward to watching more of them online.
Yes, and please be sure to stay in touch, and we will be happy to air your next projects on upcoming episodes, as we all tell our stories. It's just a wonderful global exchange.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Okay. Well, it was great talking to Scott and Lindsay, and they left us with some video clips, some of the movies they made with kids around the world. So let's take a minute and watch those.
My name is Hussein. I'm from Afghanistan, but I grew up in Iran. I am 13 years old. This is my family. I was the smaller in my family. When I was in Iran, I didn't go to school. I go for work. I go in the building. I work in the farm. I work in the car wash, and I work in the greenhouse. When I was in Iran, people treat me badly because I am from Afghanistan. When I was very tired, I think, what can I do? I choose to come in Europe. I speak with friends me, and they say okay. And we go and find the number, and we talked with a smuggler. After some days, we escaped from our house against my family wishes. This is a smuggler. We go with a smuggler. From Iran, we took the car to mountain, and we must walk in the mountain to Turkey. We around Istanbul, and after some days we go for Greece. From the bus to the first we go. From the Turkey we carry the boat to the sea. 70 people and me, we crossed the sea to Greece. The crossing took 3 hours. We land on the beach and take the bus to the refugee camp Moria. I was in Moria refugee camp. It was like Persian, but I liked because I have friends. After 3 months, they put me in the city. Now I stay in the city. Here I can do ping pong, driving, football, school, and I have freedom. Now I am like other boys in the world, and I have freedom and I can do everything I want, but I don't have family. Never lose your hope.
Hello, my name is Putri Nurlaili. I am from Lombok, Indonesia. My hobby is reading. I am 14 years old. Every morning, I always feed my chickens. This is food chicken. Every morning, I start fire with plastic cup.
This is the winner.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله
I clean my pen, then I give my cow grass.
Give my cow food. God and food.
This is my cow, and my cow drinks water. This is my brother. I think my brother is very handsome. My grandmother keeps good. She takes the wool. With wool, she spins yarn for weaving.
Mak mo aja nado nolin malik. Aja yang penuh itu terpaku itu daun apa? Nyari di warak ke belum baja daun. Ano, buta suah. Beli mak jauh terus mau misah-misah mereka. Amerika kayaknya.
Wah, mamu.
My uncle is cutting trees. This is my family rice field. My brother is carrying rice. In rain season, my friends go fishing in the river. In dry season, river has no water. My friend have sunflower. At my school, I take picture flower. Then I go to pray in the mosque 5 times. In rain season, we can do a lot of work. After finish rain, my uncle and I go to my rice field for cutting trees for the cow's food. In the evening, we come back and my mother cooks rice for us.
Mereka. Malik tutupkan kaju tu lain.
This is my daily activities. Good night.
This is my life. My name is Elroy Jr. and I live in Eleuthera, Bahamas. My pup's name is Max, and he is happy. As I get ready for school, my dad drives me to school. When I'm in the water, I float. This is how I learned how to swim and snorkel. I was so scared of the water, I could not put my face in the water, but I can now. I learned how to swim by being brave and looking under the water. I was not scared for the water. My life changed when I saw underwater. I saw a snapper, a starfish, crab, and a sponge. My goal is to go further out in the open. After snorkeling, I drive home and I play basketball. My life goal is to be the best basketball player and swimmer. Then I play with my cat. This is my dinner. I make it with onions, tomatoes, and lettuce. And I cook with Mom, and this is my life.
You know, I think talking with Scott and Lindsay really emphasizes how important storytelling is. I mean, the stories those kids told were pretty basic, but you really learned a lot about them and their lives, and I think that applies to everybody.
Yeah, no, I think their whole mission is to promote peace and tolerance, and they really see that the best way to do that is to exchange stories among children especially, because these kids can, you know, they're not as jaded, they're not as conditioned, and
they're really honest.
Yeah, and they will tell their story, and thankfully Lindsay and Scott, you know, they really will go and take the time to help them understand not only the technology of videoing their stories, but just being able to open up and share their honest exchanges, and then to share those stories with other cultures, and it just really does sort of promote that peace and tolerance that our world desperately needs.
Absolutely. I hope people will take this opportunity to contact us and share their stories too.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for joining us at the Village Green. We will definitely be back, most likely on a monthly basis. In the meantime, if you'd like to share your stories, or if you have comments or suggestions or story ideas, please get in touch with us. Really, the best way to find us at villagegreenpublishing.com. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.